And we're going to go straight to the Channel now. Illegal migrants crossing may be able to use human rights as a loophole to avoid deportation.
Yes, this is all under the terms of this new agreement with France, and asylum seekers apparently will not qualify for deportation if they happen to lodge a human rights claim or say they're under 18.
Well, it's just one of the potential loopholes that could be exploited and undermine the government's attempt to stop those boats. But, of course, this is all about the one-in, one-out deal. It came into effect yesterday. Has it been stopping those boats? The man to ask is, of course, our Home Security editor, Mark White, live there down in Dover for us. Mark, I'm assuming, given the government signed this deal, it's now in effect, there are no boats today, none at all.
Well, you would, of course, be wrong, but then you knew that anyway. You're just setting me up for the perfect introduction. Your timing is impeccable, as always, Tom and Emily. I'm going to step out of the way, and we can show you the Border Force vessel Typhoon just entering the harbour here at Dover, having picked up the first load of migrants of the day mid-channel. This was a boat that set off from Gravelines Beach near Dunkirk this morning, made it by about 11 o'clock or so to the middle of the English Channel, where it was then picked up by this Border Force vessel. There is another Border Force vessel, Ranger, which is about 5 minutes behind this one, that will be coming into the harbour with a second load of migrants that also set off in a small boat from Gravelines Beach this morning. And it will be very interesting. It is perfectly possible, given that that deal has now been signed and we're told it is now in motion, that some or all of the migrants on board this first Border Force vessel coming across may actually be returned to France under this agreement. We don't know, because the government's being quite secretive about how it will operate, just how many will go, apart from saying that the numbers will be very modest to begin with, till they see whether this scheme works as intended, and then it can be rolled out. But you know, there's a nice little spat, quite unseemly political spat underway this morning that we all love to hear about, and it's between Dame Angela Eagle, the Home Office Minister, and the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, who we featured on the channel a little earlier today. He's out in the middle of the English Channel because he wanted to see whether, after this agreement had been signed, any small boats would cross. And as we're finding, he found that small boats crossed and sent out messages and did live interviews with the likes of ourselves to that effect. Well, now Dame Angela Eagle has taken the bait and she has responded. She says, "Dear Chris, I know you're desperate for this pilot to fail, but setting the bar at whether it would rest to the instant cessation of all small boat crossings seems a bit low even for you." She goes on to say, "You may recall that on the 13th of April 2022, the day the UK-Rwanda treaty was signed, 651 people crossed the Channel. In the 7 days up to the 19th of April, she says, 2,076 people came across the Channel, still the worst week ever for arrivals in the first 5 months of the year. I don't remember you saying then that proved the Rwanda scheme wouldn't work." So, of course, Chris Philp then decided that he would launch back at Angela Eagle and said, "You know that Rwanda never got off the ground because it was scrapped the first day that Labour got into office." And he says that in 2023, our last full year, we got crossings down by 30%. This year, he points out that crossings are up 50%, the worst year ever. So the politicians are going at each other, as you would imagine, because this is a flagship policy of this government. They believe that it will prove to be a deterrent, even though it is a tiny number who are ever going to be sent to France, at least in the early stages of this scheme. Clearly the opposition believe that it just is not going to work. And that's why Chris Philp is out in the Channel today, and we're seeing, of course, the first migrant boat to arrive since that deal was signed just yesterday. And we can speak live now actually to the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, who was out in the middle of the Channel. You saw those boats as they came across. Tell us what you saw earlier.
Well, I came out to the Channel today because the government claimed their deal yesterday would deter crossings, so I wanted to come out here and find out if it's true. And it's not true, because we have seen migrant crossings, as you have said. We encountered 2 boats within just half an hour, as you say, very heavily overloaded. The French were simply ushering them, escorting them across into British waters. They made no attempt to stop them whatsoever, even though other countries like the Belgians, the Australians, do stop these boats. The French escorted them across a dangerous shipping lane. I saw a large tanker ship having to change course to avoid the migrant dinghy. Then what we saw in the middle of the Channel were 2 border force vessels, the vessels that are now behind us in port, come to collect the illegal immigrants, which they did. And the French captain then had the cheek to ask for his life jackets back. We caught that on the ship radio, so he can give those life jackets to a load of other illegal immigrants in the future. It seems to me the French are facilitating this illegal immigration, not stopping it, which I think is disgraceful.
Well, I mean, in terms of the French not really intervening in terms of stopping the migrant boats, escorting them over the Channel, they've been doing that for years. They were doing that under your watch. I don't recall you criticising them very much when they were doing that previously.
Well, I think we've always said the French should do a lot more, and escorting boats across, in my view, is completely wrong, and I know previous governments made that point. But the only way to really stop this is to remove every single illegal migrant who arrives in the UK. So just in a few minutes, we're going to see probably another 70 or 80 migrants getting disembarked from just down there in the docks below us. Now, if every single one of those was immediately and without judicial process removed, either to their home country if possible, or to a third country like Rwanda, pretty quickly they wouldn't bother making the crossing. Problem is, the Labour government's plan is only to return, it would appear, at most 6% of those, which means 94% of the people getting off that border force cutter down there are going to be allowed to stay in the UK. And that is clearly no deterrent at all, which is why they have continued to cross today, despite Labour's deal.
Now, the government would argue, and indeed the government is, Dame Angela Eagle, the Home Office Minister, arguing today that, you know, to judge the deterrent factor of this scheme on the very first day of operation is rather unfair, to say the least, given that she says the day the Rwanda scheme was signed, 671 migrants crossed on that particular day, and in fact over subsequent days some 2,000 odd crossed, very significant numbers that haven't been beaten since at that time of year.
Well, first of all, this year so far, 2025, has been the worst year in history for illegal crossings. That is down to this Labour government. Secondly, the Rwanda scheme, while it was signed, it was never actually commenced because the last government had to work through all of those legal challenges. We had to pass a new law through Parliament. That was eventually done, and by the summer of last year, by July last year, the Rwanda scheme was ready to go. That would have seen 100% of illegal arrivals getting removed. That would have acted as a deterrent. But what did Keir Starmer do? He cancelled it days before it was due to start, with no replacement plan at all. And that is why we have seen numbers surging, and this year so far has been the worst ever. That is down to Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and this weak Labour government.
But on Angela Eagle's substantive point there of, look, you know, judging it on the first day is probably not the fairest way of trying to ascertain whether this is going to work or not as a deterrent, that it should be judged perhaps in the medium to long term.
Well, it was announced yesterday. If it has a deterrent effect, it should have kicked in straight away. And, you know, if you wanted to take a medium-term view, this year so far, you know, we're now in August, has been the worst in history on Labour's watch. And this plan they've got is also, it's got more holes than a Swiss cheese. You know, if somebody claims to be under 18, they don't get returned to France. If somebody lodges a modern slavery claim, they don't get returned. And if someone makes a human rights claim, even if the Home Office certified as clearly unfounded, the person doesn't get returned to France. So the human rights lawyers will make mincemeat of the government using all of those various loopholes, and I'm very sceptical any significant number of people are going to get returned, which means it won't be a deterrent, and unfortunately this won't work. Labour made a massive mistake by cancelling Rwanda before it even started, with no credible replacement.
So what are you going to do then? Because clearly in the years that the Conservatives were in office and small boat migrants have been an issue, nothing was done in substantive terms that actually made any difference to the numbers. I know you said they'd gone down 30% or so after the Rwanda scheme was announced, but actually you know, that was kind of year on year. They were up one year, they were down the next. What are you going to do? I mean, the European Convention of Human Rights, you've been arguing as to whether you're going to stay in or come out. What is your decision on that?
Well, first of all, we've said that we should disapply, repeal the Human Rights Act in relation to all immigration matters straight away. We put that to a vote in Parliament a few weeks ago, but Labour voted against it. What that would do is stop judges here in the UK from allowing dangerous foreign criminals, illegal immigrants and others with no right to be here to remain in the UK. We think that's wrong. We think those people should be removed from the country, and repealing the Human Rights Act for immigration matters would enable that. Now, we may need to go further and come out of the ECHR entirely. We've got Lord Wolfson, one of the country's most eminent barristers, looking at that right now. He'll report back in just a few weeks' time, and if we need to leave the ECHR in order to make sure every single foreign criminal is deported, every illegal immigrant is removed upon arrival, and others with no right to be here are removed. If we need to leave the ECHR to do that, we will, and that announcement is coming in just a few weeks' time.
What about the idea of Nightingale camps for all of these asylum seekers who are here? There's a great deal of anger right across the country at the hotel policy begun under your government that still continues, reduced but still continues. And now, of course, this government wants to put people into the heart of communities right across the country by putting them in HMOs and other housing in communities right across the country. What about actually disused army bases and alike, getting Nightingale structures up there that can house them? Doesn't that make more sense?
Well, I think it does, and in fact the last government set up a former army camp called Napier Barracks just down the road from here in Folkestone to house, I think it was about 400 people who had entered the country illegally, illegal immigrants. So I think those kind of solutions can work, and they should be used instead of hotels, because hotels are costing a fortune, you know, billions of pounds a year of hard-earned taxpayers' money. But the real solution is to remove illegal arrivals immediately when they get here, without delay, without court process, and then the problem of housing them won't arise. And the deterrent effect of removing everybody immediately upon arrival means others in the future won't bother attempting the crossing, which is exactly what Australia found about 12 or 13 years ago when they took the same approach. They had actually an even bigger problem than we do with illegal maritime arrivals. It was over 50,000 a year. They started removing all of those arrivals to a little island called Nauru, and within a few months the crossing stopped entirely, because why bother crossing if you're going to wind up in Nauru? The Rwanda principle is exactly the same as that. It worked in Australia, it would work here, and then you won't need to have accommodation of any kind because the illegal arrivals will stop.
Now, I know you've been critical of the French government for escorting boats across the Channel, for giving migrants life jackets. Effectively, you and many people feel that's tantamount to enabling those migrants to cross the English Channel. What about the policy that we're told will come and will come soon of pushing the migrant boats back onto the shore that the French maritime forces will enact? Surely that's to be welcomed.
Well, I mean, the government have been talking about that for quite a long time, for months and months now, and yet nothing has happened on the ground. So to be honest, I'll believe it when I see it.
OK, Chris Philp, thank you very much. I know you've got to dash off, but thanks for speaking to us live on GB News.
Thank you.
The Shadow Home Secretary there, who was out in the middle of the Channel today, just hours after the government announced the signing of that deal between France and the UK that would allow for a partial return of these small boat migrants. And he saw, of course, 2 boats already coming across the English Channel.
Can I briefly ask you, I saw you there with a certain Mr. Chris Philp, chasing dinghies, channeling, pun intended, his inner Nigel Farage. Don't you think he's got a bit of a brass neck? They didn't stop any boats when they were in power.
Well, this is it. I mean, he was rather angry at the sights that he was seeing of the French escorting these migrant boats safely across to UK waters. And I put it to him that, you know, they've been doing that for years. They were doing that when the Conservatives were in government. And I didn't really see him criticising that policy at the time, where he claims that they were critical of the French actions at that point. You can judge for yourselves. You can all remember back to how the Conservatives were trying to, in the same way as Labour is, doing deal after deal and giving hundreds of millions of pounds to the French in the hope that they would somehow be compliant in the efforts to stop the migrants crossing the channel. On the issue, for instance, of pushing the boats back, we've been hearing this government talking for months about the French finally enacting that policy. Nothing's happened as yet, and the boats keep coming. 155 migrants so far today, but my producer Chris down here tells us that there are now significant French patrol activities around Gravelines Beach, which is just in the Dunkirk area, thinking now that a significant number of migrant boats are about to push off from that end of the French coast.
OK, Mark White, you're doing God's work there on the cliffs of Dover, shining a light onto this unravelling scandal. Let's be absolutely frank about it. Bedlam, chaos in the Channel. Mark, we'll come back to you in the next hour. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Watching that boat come closer and closer and closer to the coast, it looks like it's just about to drop off those people. Do we know how many may be on board? Do we have that type of information?
We believe at least 60 on board, but we'll have a firmer idea soon as you start seeing them come off. They come off. What's happening at the moment is that the typhoon is rounding the corner into an area of the harbour known as the Western Jetfoil. That's the area where Border Force has its migrant processing centre, an ad hoc collection of sort of portable cabin type buildings, a marquee, various buses waiting to take the migrants once they've been initially processed there to the Manston main processing centre just further up the coast. And at Manston, of course, they are kept in there for a couple of days while they are properly processed, and their next location where they are going to is sorted out. And now that may be the likes of the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf that we know the government has taken over now as a contingency for the potential of a summer surge and an overspill. And just at the weekend there, under the cover of darkness, the first group of migrants entered the Britannia Hotel. So it's very possible, as you hear the helicopter hovering overhead there, that this next group of migrants, once they're processed, could be heading off to the Britannia as well. Or, as I say, it's equally possible that they may be in short order heading across to the other side of the channel, providing, of course, they don't get a very able human rights lawyer and an activist group to advocate on their behalf. And then we're told they'll be able to mount a potential challenge which could scupper any chance to put them across back to France, in the same way that all of the other challenges during the previous government, the Conservative government's operations, did as well, with these activist groups and lawyers doing their level best to frustrate the government at every turn. I should say, just while we're talking, if Joe, our cameraman, can give you a shot. It's just coming into shot now, the Border Force vessel Ranger. It's going to be a bit of a slightly messy move as he has to come in and out of shot, but Ranger is the other Border Force vessel with another group of migrants on board that is making its way in. And we know on the busy days, we see them stacking up here at Dover Harbour as Border Force vessel after Border Force vessel and even lifeboats are called into action to pick up the migrants and take them here to the processing centre. So it's certainly possible as the day progresses, and our sources suggesting that the conditions are just ripe for more small boat crossings throughout today.
And Mark, the French can also just decide that they don't want to take back these migrants on various different grounds, can't they? They've got 28 days to give a response, and if they just ignore the request, the migrant stays in the United Kingdom, so they can say, oh, we don't actually fancy taking these ones back to France.
Heaven forfend we should ever imagine that the French would do anything to frustrate the smooth working of this border force operation, but you know, yes, that is absolutely a power open to them for whatever reason. If they decide that anyone being returned to them is someone whom perhaps they feel would not be conducive to the public good in France, then yes, they can intervene and stop that process. So you've got the French authorities on one side, you've got the lawyers and the activist groups on the other side, who all could coalesce around these migrants and ensure that efforts to get them returned in a timely manner to France are frustrated. And I guess that's what the government means as well about just this being a pilot and seeing how it will operate. If it does become unworkable, then it might have to change its mind and decide that this scheme has to be abandoned. We know that the previous government had to go through hoops and hoops over a good number of years, from successive courts right up from the High Court to the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court and back again, to finally get the definitive word on the Rwanda deal. It said it was in the final process of getting those flights off the ground and was planning to do it within 2 weeks of the general election. But of course, Sir Keir Starmer took office. It was his first duty, the first bill that he signed effectively across his table was the scrapping of that Rwanda deal when he got into office. So we'll never know whether Rwanda would have acted as a deterrent. The Conservatives certainly believe it would have been much more of a deterrent, sending many more people to Rwanda than actually this deal, which for the foreseeable seems to only be sending about 5% of those who arrive here back across the channel. So 95% of those arriving here, it seems, will not be subject of any kind of efforts to return them to France.
Mark, I think we're just seeing people leave that vessel for the first time, migrants with life jackets on them. Can you see the sort of demographics on board that boat? Does it look like overwhelmingly men to you?
You can probably see better than me because you're seeing through the long end of our lens down there, but I can assure you that as with the vast majority of these boats, yes, you'll get the odd woman and child, but the vast majority of those migrants are young men. About 85% of those on board the boats are adult males. The rest are women and children. And you'll see that most boats will contain maybe a couple of women and a couple of children, and that's for very cynical reasons, because then those on board a small boat can contact the rescue services and get, they believe, a more urgent and quick response because there are women and children on board that boat. And the same kind of thing is actually going to happen on the other side of the channel. You know, a lot has been made of the scheme by the French that this government keeps telling us they're about to enact, that pushback policy where the French will circle a small boat if it's in shallow water and push it back to the beach. However, there was an intervention a few weeks back where the French waded into the water and punctured the small boat and then said the next time there was an opportunity to do exactly the same thing, that they were not going to do that because there was some women and children on board that boat. So what are the people smugglers going to do? Of course, they're going to ensure that every small boat has at least some women and children on board so that the French won't intervene, because the French will feel that it's too dangerous to intervene and to do that. As we speak, as more of these migrants are coming up the gangplank, up the gangway I should say, and it certainly looks like there's a lot on board this Border Force vessel. Ranger is just within a couple of hundred metres off the entrance to Dover Harbour now.
And Mark, I'm just looking at the weather forecast for the area, for the south of England, and it looks like we are due for at least a couple of weeks of sunny, pretty temperate weather. Almost a bad time to announce such a change of policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, you know, if the government wants to invest in a surefire way of stopping the migrants, perhaps, you know, they could invest in climate scientists to look at ways, innovative ways of whipping up the wind in the channel, because that's the only way that you're guaranteed to prevent these small migrant boats coming across the channel. Now, what we're told is that tomorrow it's going to be good weather throughout the rest of today and overnight, and then by mid-morning tomorrow the winds are going to whip up again to the point where it's probably not passable, but then it's going to be on and off for a period of time. More good days than bad days. So yeah, expect thousands more to cross in the next week or two.
Gosh, well, Mark, thanks so much for bringing us those live pictures. The first arrivals in the United Kingdom, brought, of course, by British Border Force vessels to this country. One already docked, a second on its way. This, the day that one-in, one-out deal goes into effect.
Yes, meanwhile, Angela Eagle is writing little letters and posting them on Twitter to Chris Philp, the battle of the words that Mark was describing a little bit earlier. She does say, I hope you're getting a nice tan, to Chris Philp, who's been spending the day in the Channel.
Well, perhaps he is.
Perhaps he is, yes.